How's it going, everybody? This is Rusty here at FCP Aero, and today I'm going to show you guys how to replace the front control arms on your Mk8 Golf R. In front of me on the table, we do have a couple of options from SuperPro for our front control arm DIY here. We're going to be going with the alloy control arms, which are a great construction. They're lighter, they're stronger, they're stiffer. They're going to give us a little bit more camber and caster, as well as giving us that turn-in feel that we're all going to be looking for in the corners. The stamped steel design I have over here on the other side does actually come from SuperPro with the bushings pressed in, which is a nice alternative. If you don't want to put these bushings in yourself, you can certainly get the genuine replacement OEM style control arm with the bushings already pressed in. You can see these are slightly offset to give you a little bit more camber and caster. And then we also have the SuperPro ball joints installed on these already. You have a polyurethane bushing in the front of the control arm as well as the rear, but the nice thing about the alloys is they're a lot lighter. So aside from these visually being a lot nicer, they are stronger, they are lighter, and they physically are a different suspension geometry. So one thing to keep in mind when installing these, or even these with the offset bushing, is if you're planning on lowering the vehicle, the increased caster may rub the front of the wheel wells when you're going through a full sweep. We're going with the LEM 4-door ball joints, and then we also have a complete hardware set. We may have to lower the subframe here. If you have a DSG vehicle, you're definitely going to have to lower the subframe. The driver's side bolt coming out of the front position on the control arm is more than likely going to hit that DSG bottom of the transmission there. So keep that in mind if you're going ahead and replacing this. We're going to be doing it on a manual vehicle, so hopefully I'll be able to just loosen the dog bone mount or pendulum lower transmission mount, slide the engine out of the way, and get these arms out without taking it down. But if we do have to lower the subframe, I've got everything here for it. So a couple of things you can keep in mind for some concerns. If you do have some bushing wear or ball joint wear, anything like that, you'll get some clunking, some squeaking. A lot of times the bushings on the genuine arms start to tear around the edges, and you can see that through the wheel well, looking through, and the edges of the bushings start to tear. The front bushings don't typically wear as quickly as the rear bushings. However, they do wear as well. So if you're doing one, you should do the other. And the ball joints, you can typically hear some clunking in the front end, or even if you have the vehicle up in the air and you're shaking the wheel, you can have a little bit of play in that lower ball joint. Now that we've gone over everything on the table, one thing I did not talk about was the SuperPro camber caster bushings that they offer for the front position of the control arms. If you're not considering the full replacement of the bushings or the control arms as well, we do offer many single replacement bushings for the Golf R control arms, whether you want to do the rear position or the front position. Check these out at fcpaero.com as well. With that, let's talk about some tools we'll need for this job. Now, as far as tools are concerned, for bits here, we have a T30, a T40, a 10mm socket, a 16mm socket, a 17mm socket, an 18mm socket, and then finally we have a 24mm 12-point socket. Definitely going to be helpful to have a 1/2-inch impact gun. We also have a small little 1/4-inch driver, but not necessary, just handy to have on hand. We also are definitely going to want a couple of flashlights, if not one good bright one. We have a 3/8 ratchet with a long handle on it for a little added leverage. We also have a smaller 3/8 ratchet, which may come in handy as well. 1/4-inch ratchet, a dead blow hammer, or a rubber mallet would be handy. I've got a pair of wheel hangers here as well. We also have a ball joint press. This is going to make quick use of removing those ball joints in the aluminum knuckle as opposed to hammering on them like many of us are used to. I've got an 18mm wrench, a little bit longer than your traditional wrench. Torque marker, the factory lug cap puller, otherwise you can use a 90-degree pick, a wire brush. On my left, we have a 1/2-inch breaker bar, and then we have a 1/2-inch torque wrench. Keep in mind, you're going to be torquing things from 8 Newton meters and above 200 Newton meters, so it may be handy to have a couple of different torque wrenches. We've got a medium-sized pry bar, a small panel tool, and then my handy little third hand, I like to call it, the rope ratchet. Now that we've gone over everything on the table, let's get started on the job. Once you get the vehicle up in the air, located in the trunk, if you don't have it, you can certainly use a little 90-degree pick, is the wheel cover puller. We'll go ahead and pull all these wheel covers off. We also have a wheel lock on this vehicle, so if you have one of those, grab that as well. And then a 17mm, we're going to be using an impact gun here. Certainly get away with just the hand tool in the trunk. A couple of wheel hangers to make our life easier. We'll continue ripping these lugs off, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. We're going to start by taking off this front belly pan, and then on these stamped steel arms, we do have two covers that we have to remove in order to get to the level sensors that are located on both of those arms. So with a T25 to start, we're going to take the belly pan screws out, and then you may have to work the trim belly pan out. There are two little notches that sometimes lock that into the lower portion of the front radiator support, but we'll get that out of our way now. Now that we've got that out of the way, we're going to work on these little plastic rivets. If you do break these and you're just installing the alloy arms, it's not a huge deal because we're not actually going to be able to reinstall these trim covers. If you're doing the stamped steel arms that I had on the table and you are going to be reusing these, you may want to get a new pair of these clips. And then that just gives us access to that level sensor. So again, we won't need these anymore. It's just a lot of road grime and debris stuck in these plastic rivets, so they tend to really get lodged in there. All right, got that out. Now with a 10 millimeter, we're gonna go ahead and pop off the level sensors. If you are using an impact gun, be careful that you keep a hand on top of it and keep the level sensor pushed into the arm. If you don't, and this little tab comes unlodged, it can spin the bracket all around. So you can certainly do it by hand, but again, even doing it by hand, once the nut loosens up to a certain point, that level sensor can start to spin around on you. So keep that all in mind. Go ahead and loosen up the ball joint nuts, and with a 16 millimeter, you may need to do these by hand first if you don't have a pretty strong impact gun. And simply just pull down on the arms or put a screwdriver between the ball joint and the control arm to get them to separate a little bit. Now we're going to go ahead and crack the control arms free. If you have a DSG vehicle and you're lowering the subframe to get them out to make clearance on the transmission, keep in mind that you still will want to crack the bolts free on these front control arm portions as well as the rear, because once the subframe becomes loose, you don't have as much stability and rigidity with it tightened up to the vehicle like we do have here. So again, keep that in mind. It's going to make it a lot easier to loosen it now than it would be once it's loosened up. All four of these control arm bolts are an 18 millimeter. So again, I'm just going to crack them loose. So as you can see, this one has plenty of room to come all the way out. We're not going to have any issues there. We can certainly take this control arm in and out without issue. Come over to the passenger side. This bolt, as it begins to loosen up, will most likely come into contact with the oil pan. So I'm going to loosen this up and show you why we're going to be going ahead and loosening the dog bone mount bolt. So again, lucky for us, we do have a manual Golf R, so this bolt is not going to come in contact with the DSG transmission. And the bolt on the other side looks fairly close, but I think we'll be able to clear that as well. Now that we have all the hardware out of both front control arms, we can get these old stamped steel, flexible factory control arms out and get ready to put our new aluminum Super Pro control arms in. With a small pry bar, you may just need to wiggle these out, forcing them down and away from the knuckle. Once you get that front position out, you just need to work these. Now that we have both of our control arms out of the way, I do want to just take a second to talk about the level sensors. They're expensive, they're plastic, they're very fragile, so make sure to keep them out of your way while you're getting those control arms out. But now that we have those control arms out, we can start working on our lower ball joints. You can see the nut is directly underneath the axle boot, so we're not going to have enough room to tighten these back up and torque them to the specified 60 Newton meters. However, you certainly could go about releasing the nut here, pressing them out with a ball joint popper, and then tightening them back up, but you will not be able to get them properly torqued without some special tools. So we're going to go ahead and release the axle bolts with a 24 millimeter, and also keeping in mind that if you did not have the ability to get these axle bolts out, as they are pretty tight and you don't have a powerful impact gun, you may want to crack the axle bolts loose before you even get the vehicle up in the air. And so that would just be using a breaker bar with the center cap out of the wheel and having the vehicle back on the ground. But we've got an impact gun. We're going to go ahead and take the rotor screws out so we don't break the head of the rotor screws, and we'll impact those axle bolts right out. With the T30, we'll get the rotor screw out of our way. And then before we get that axle out, we won't have the control arm in there, so it will rest on the sway bar here, but you want to be careful not to damage that inner joint. So I'm going to grab something to hold this axle up and out of the way while we're working on that lower ball joint. Now, before we start releasing this lower ball joint, it's not a bad idea to use a wire brush. Remove some of the rust that's built up above the nut in the center of the ball joint threads, and then we'll also use a little bit of penetrating fluid to make sure that that ball joint comes off nice and easy. So we just want to scrape off any of the large amounts of rust that are on top of that, so it'll release that ball joint nut a little bit easier for us. And if you do need to counter hold the center of this ball joint, there's a Torx bit in the center. So you want to make sure that there's nothing in there so you can get a Torx bit in there and counter hold it if you have to. Once you get most of that rust removed, and put a little penetrant up here and kind of soak it in there with a paper towel. All right, we're going to grab an 18 millimeter and we're going to crack that lower nut loose. Because we don't have that lower control arm connected anymore and it's only pivoting on the tie rod, you're going to have to hold the front side of this, or on the other side, you're going to have to hold the back side to keep it from pivoting while you're trying to release this. You want to raise that ball joint nut so it's just a little bit above the stud there, and then we're going to use a ball joint popper to press that out. You certainly do not want to whack on this knuckle. It is an aluminum knuckle. Previously, when having steel knuckles, it was very common to hit it with a hammer when releasing tie rods or ball joints, but we want to make sure that this vehicle is going to have a long life ahead of it, so we don't want to do any deformations or dents in the steering knuckle. So we're going to go ahead and use a ball joint press. You may need to manipulate the ball joint a little bit just to get it out. All right, once it's all set up, we're going to just get this thing ready to be popped out. We're going to use a 24 millimeter on our ball joint tool with that nut still in there. Tighten up. And then you hear that pop, ball joint's. It's way easier than whacking it with a hammer and sitting there damaging your steering knuckle. And the reason I brought up the counter hold earlier is now that the ball joint is released, the thing can spin continuously. If you did not release it high enough on the end of the ball joint, you may have to counter hold it at this point to actually get the ball joint to fully disengage. And that's what looks like is happening. So I think it's a T40, if I recall. So with a T40, you can hold that factory genuine ball joint. Maybe the same on the Lemforder. We'll double check in a second here. But T40 in the center and an 18 millimeter to loosen up that nut, and we should be able to get this thing out. All right. And the ball joint is out of here. So let's get our new ball joints ready to go in. You're gonna do the same thing on the other side, removing that ball joint, axle bolt, and all that, and we'll get ready to start installing our new ball joints and our new control arms. Now that we've got everything out of our way, start to reassemble. So the Lemforder ball joints are specific side to side. You'll notice that there is an R stamped on the top of the ball joint, and that R means from the driver's seat of the vehicle. So passenger side is right, driver's side is left. We're going to take the right side ball joint and get it fitted. I did mention that the Lemforder ball joints, even though they're aftermarket, do have that same provision of a T40 in the center. So that should make it a lot easier to tighten it up, get the ball joint started in the knuckle. The nut that comes in that kit is 18 as well as the factory one. So just like we loosened them up with an 18 and a T40 to counter hold. Now that we got that one started, we're going to throw the other side in and we'll grab the torque wrench and get those ball joint nuts torqued to 60 Newton meters before putting that axle back in, because once that axle is back in the way, we won't have the ability to get a socket on there with a torque wrench. Now that we have our ball joints in and torqued, before we throw our axles back in, it may be a little bit easier with the knuckles kicked out the way they are to try to fit those new control arms in. Those poly bushings in the rear are going to be a lot stiffer than those factory arms. All right, now that we have our new ball joints installed and we're ready to go put our control arms in, as we stated in the beginning, we're going with the aluminum set. And this aluminum set, although it does have the bushings already pressed in, we will take our installation grease and do a little bit of greasing on these bushings. I do also want to make mention the Super Pro Durable control arm bushing. You can see that it does have some polyurethane on the outside, while it has a Heim joint on the center of that, making that a Super Pro exclusive here. This is going to give you a little bit of comfort with some turn-in ability and a little bit stiffening, while still retaining some drivability on the road and not just having a full metal-on-metal control arm bushing, which is common when you go to a spherical bushing in this position on these vehicles. So with the installation grease that is included in the kit, we're going to take the bushings and just put a little bit of grease on the outsides of them to make it a little bit easier to install, as well as keep any noise down during the driving of the vehicle. So I'm going to put a tiny bit of grease on the inside of here, not so much on the actual joint itself, but more specifically on the bushing, because this little piece that pops on there is going to be spinning and squeaking a little bit. It's going to be manipulating while you're going over bumps. One other thing I do want to make mention is grab yourself a small screwdriver, or I have here a 1/4-inch ratchet, put it in the joint here and just move the bushings a little bit, because when they come out of the vehicle, they are very, very stiff. And when you're going to put them into the car, if those haven't been worked at least once already, they're going to be very difficult to get set up. You do have a pretty substantially machined surface right here, so you are going to have to get the bushing perfectly into that, and it may be a little bit difficult if you haven't already released the stiffness of this joint. So now that we've got these off and our joint loosened up, let's go ahead and grease these up and get this arm in. A little bit does go a long way, so just put a little bit on your finger and spread it throughout both of these pieces here. Once those are greased, get those on. We'll do the same thing on the forward position. Just a little bit on the outside of the bushings so that they slide into the subframe nice and easily. And go ahead and put this one back on once we've got a nice good thin coating. Now that we have our control arm prepped and ready to install, I'm going to give ourselves a little bit more room since we don't have the subframe down. If you recall, when we were pulling those factory arms out, this corner of the fender liner was giving us a little bit of a problem. So with the T25, we're going to release a couple of these screws just so we can make that a little bit looser, give us a little bit more room when pushing these bushings into the subframe. The T25, I'm going to take this screw out here. There's one more on the side here. Those out of our way. It's going to give us a little bit more room in order to position that control arm a little bit more flat and help us install that spherical bushing in the back position. You could certainly go ahead, take the rest of the T25 screws for this whole fender liner out if you don't want to hold that out of the way, or we could even position it kind of tucked onto the tie rod like that. Hopefully it doesn't fling back in my face, but there's a couple of options here. Certainly don't really need to go ahead and do this, but it will make our lives a lot easier. One other thing to mention, these control arms are not side to side specific. They are pretty symmetrical. The bushings are installed very symmetrically as well. I'm going to install it with the alloy part number facing up. That way if we do see the vehicle from the bottom, we just see the nice embossed Super Pro from below. And now that we've greased the bushings, if there's any dirt, debris on the inside of those positions, as you saw, a bunch of dirt came out of the fender liner. There's a good chance there's some debris on the inside of those subframe positions. So go ahead and clean up any metal burrs that may have come out from the bolts, clean out any dirt, debris, anything that's going to cause any noise from the subframe here. Keep in mind, these bushings are going to be much tighter than the factory ones we removed. And if you recall, we did have to use a pry bar to get them out. Put this up out of the way. The flatter you keep the control arm, the easier it will be to install. So keep that in mind as well. May even need a little bit of a mallet as an assist. All right, once you have the bushing in place, go ahead and you may even need to use a screwdriver. I'm going to use the bolt here to kind of align the hole of the bushing. Get that one installed. Get this one installed. We're going to get these tightened up finger tight. This one might not be lined up all the way. Oh, it feels like it's catching. You really want to make sure that you are putting these in by hand and not using a gun. The receiving end of this bolt is actually part of the subframe. There is no nut. I'm not holding anything on the top. The previous models, there was a nut here where the through bolt would be loosened and you'd have a serviceable nut. If you damage the threads on this position or even this position, it is going to require you to either retap, helicoil, or replace the subframe. So please keep that in mind. Really want to put these in all by hand, making sure that you don't overstress any of these threads. And then we'll go back and torque them to 70 Newton meters plus 180 degrees. All right. Now, before we go ahead and torque these back up, we're going to go ahead and install the other side off camera real quick. And then we're going to reassemble the axles and the ball joints. We'll get everything snugged up together and we'll go back and torque everything all at once. So we'll take a second and do the off-camera side, but it is just like the other side here as well. All right, now that we have our control arms all installed, we're ready to start putting our fender liners back in. We only took out 4 of the T25 screws, but if you took out the entire fender liner, go ahead and reinstall the entire fender liner now. Torque spec on these is really, really light, so if you are using an impact gun, run them down, and that's it. They're very, very low torque, so keep that in mind. You don't need to hammer down on these. All right, let's go ahead and swing the axle back into place. If you remember, I did tie them up with our handy little ratchet rope here. Tied it up too good. There we go. Release that. We're just gonna slide that back into the splines, get it close to it, get this control arm below your ball joint. All right, it's gonna be a little bit of a dance. Get the thing started, get the axle started in the hub so we can push it all in at one shot. There we go. There it is. We're gonna hand tighten some new ball joint hardware that comes with the LEM 4-door ball joints. We'll get this torqued up later on to the factory spec as well. We just wanna get everything fitted. Got our new axle bolts. Get those started as well. All right, make sure our set screw for the rotor is still lined up. And then we're going to install the level sensor back into the new control arm. So make sure that your level sensor didn't flip on you and over rotate or anything. Kept pretty close eye on it, made sure that it didn't. We have a new nut for the level sensor to go nicely with your new control arms. But that pretty much takes care of all the hardware. So we're going to go do the other side real quick as well. And then we'll come back and we'll torque everything at the same time. Now that we've gone ahead and snugged all of our hardware back up, we're going to start back on the T30 screw that holds the rotor on that we removed. We're going to do that one to 8 Newton meters. Then we're going to work our way all the way back in. And now for the 3 control arm bolts that go through the new control arms and onto our new LEM 4-door ball joint. We're going to be torquing those to 40 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. Now for doing the angle, you can simply mark the bolt and spin it a quarter turn. You don't need a fancy digital torque wrench like we have there. You can make your own 90 degrees. Now the level sensor, we're going to be torquing to 8 Newton meters with a new piece of hardware on there. Now doing the actual main control arm bolts, these are going to be 70 Newton meters plus 180 degrees. And just like we did on the ball joint bolts, you can certainly make a mark, 12 o'clock, whatever you want to do, maybe even 9 o'clock so you can see it over here. You just want to rotate that bolt 180 degrees once you reach that final 70 Newton meters. And as you can see, we are very close to the oil pan here. If you have some sagging engine mounts or doing it on the other side with the DSG, you may actually not be able to do this the same way. So keep that in mind. We have a pretty low mileage vehicle. Our engine mounts are pulling it just up out of the way. If you have some collapsed mounts, this may be a little bit more difficult. And obviously doing it on the other side, is going to be impossible with the DSG without lowering the subframe. So with that, let's go ahead and torque these down. And one other thing to keep in mind, you might notice that we're torquing these without the vehicle at ride height. Because we have polyurethane bushings and the rubber bushing is not bonded to the center of that, like on a typical genuine bushing, we don't actually have to set these at ride height, which makes it a lot easier for installation, where this control arm bushing is actually going to be tightened up. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your next control arm bushing or anything like that. This is going to make for installation a lot easier. Now that we've taken care of everything underneath here, with the exception of the center axle bolts, I've gone ahead and torque marked everything so we can refer to that in the future. I also want to make mention that if you are, well, everyone's going to need an alignment after this, as these arms do change the suspension geometry. You do have to replace these nuts every time you loosen them or replace them. So keep that in mind. If you're going to get an alignment and you really want to fine tune the camber, you will need to have an additional set of 6 nuts to go from your driveway to the alignment shop. But with that, we're gonna go ahead and put the belly pan back on, get the car back down. We got some more DIYs to do. And just like the T25s that are in the fender liners, they are not very tight. They're only about 3 Newton meters, so be very careful when installing them with a gun. And we're almost there. Get the vehicle back down on the ground. We're going to torque that center 24 millimeter axle bolt to 200 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. And then we'll torque the wheels to 140 Newton meters. Then we're almost ready to go over to the alignment rack before we can start enjoying this vehicle. All right, now we're going to do the final 90 degrees. I've got a little extra persuasion or assistance from the handle of my floor jack. And we just want to do a 90-degree turn. And that's about 90 there. And last but not least, the center cap and the beauty caps for the lugs. All right, and that pretty much takes care of today's DIY. You'll notice the front wheel was a little bit closer to the front fender here, and that was with that extra caster. We'll have a little bit of camber adjustability. And with talking about that, make sure you immediately get over to your closest alignment rack. We will definitely notice a little bit of handling characteristics that have changed until the vehicle is completely straight and aligned with this added suspension geometry. So, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If so, hit that like button. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, get down in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe, because we'll have plenty more DIYs on this vehicle and many others like it. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.